Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about sex and dating during Femdom addiction recovery. So I received this email recently from somebody who wanted to learn a little bit more about our approach towards sex and dating when they're trying to overcome their Femdom addiction. This guy is not in the Compulsion Academy, so what I'm going to do today is teach this the best I can by using quite a few concepts within our program, but I'm not going to be actually going into complete depth on the Beyond Compulsion method because that would take hours and hours of training. There's a sequence to it and there's a lot more really to implement before you move on to the next sequence and the next part of the training and so on. But here we go. Here's the question. Hey, can I just also ask how you navigate sex or dating during recovery? Because in Porn Reboot, they didn't really seem to recommend sex within the first 90 days of recovery so as not to get triggered and relapse. In my Femdom porn addiction, especially feeling like a confident man who tries getting dates, it's exactly the opposite of listening to these doms constantly humiliate and degrading you, telling you you're a total loser who can never get a girlfriend and are only good to pay pretty girls money. Just curious what you think because it's a total mindfuck. Maybe dating is okay early on, ? So there's quite a lot here to sort of dissect and analyse, and hopefully this will be very useful to the guy asking this question because I'm sure you will be listening. So let's get into it. The first thing I would say is if you are struggling with a Femdom addiction, feel free to take the compulsion test, and if you leave your number there and say yes on the question about would you like me to personally talk you through your scores, I'll give you a call, we can have a little chat. All right, now counting days. This was the first thing that stood out to me, is what I would really urge someone to abstain from doing is measuring your success in terms of how many days you've gone in your recovery, because it's a really bad measure. Because what can happen is people can get to 90 days or whatever and then relapse. So let's say you did this approach that's maybe recommended within Porn Reboot, where you abstain from sex, you abstain from masturbation, I'm guessing anyway, and you abstain from porn. I'm guessing that's what they recommend, something like that. So you don't get triggered and relapse. You do that for 90 days. Let's say you actually complete the 90 days. And then you get into a relationship. You're okay, I'm good now. And then you go relapse. You're going to be kind of screwed because getting to 90 days, that isn't a good measure of success at all. That isn't really doing anything because I know that I've got to 90 days 4 or 5 times without understanding how to deal with this problem correctly. You can do that through just really willpowering it out, discipline, just going to the gym, distracting yourself, staying super busy, and having all the blockers and everything. You can probably do that. Maybe not everyone, but maybe if you go completely all in on self-improvement, you can get to 90 days. And I have, I've done that a lot of times. To me, that doesn't really mean shit. I ended up relapsing every time I got to 90 days anyway. It doesn't rewire the brain getting to 90 days. What really changes the neural pathways is learning how to deal with compulsive desires very, very directly in an assertive, rational way, just moment by moment. That's how you're going to actually change your neural pathways and get to a position where you have complete self-trust, integrity, confidence, you just feel okay, I know what to do if I have an urge. And then you're not worried about getting triggered. So you're not worried about any of these sort of triggers or anything at all. So you can kind of just crack on. So that's the first thing I want to say is, counting the days, it's not a good idea. And instead what will happen is you'll just know naturally when you're ready. So if anything, I'd say you'll know you're ready when you know how to deal with the addicted part of the mind correctly. And you've actually had some practice, maybe you've got some reps in of using the script and actually dealing with those urges head on. When you've done that a lot of times, you'll kind of be okay, and I'll trust myself, I'm no longer fearing urges. It's not about how many days you've gone, it's just about do you feel steady and stable? Do you have the trust that if you have an urge, you're going to be able to deal with it? That's really a good indicator of whether you're succeeding in overcoming a porn or Femdom addiction. So, just take it moment by moment and you will know when you're ready. The other thing I would say is what's the intention here, because what the addictive part of the mind wants is you to engage in any compulsive behavior. It doesn't really matter whether it's like porn or whether it's like going on Tinder and just like having sex with some random girls, or it's like, having sex with prostitutes, or it's just like dating, and all those sort of things I've just mentioned there can definitely be compulsive as well and lead to what we call the detour to disaster, where you replace one compulsive behavior with another. So what's the real intention here? Is it like love and romance in a relationship you're looking for? Or is it just like some short-term sort of temporary relief from the discomfort of going through the withdrawal process and, just swiping on Tinder to like have sex with whatever you see on there? There's a massive difference there. So another thing is, it's really important to acknowledge that the desire to like watch porn or the desire with Femdom is because you have addicted neural pathways right now, and they exist in the mind. And so whether you have sex or you abstain from the sex, you're either way, like, you're going to want to engage in this compulsive behavior. And it's really the response to that desire that matters. And that's why, again, like, this idea of, let's not have sex because then I'll get triggered is just so flawed, because you're still going to have the desire. And it's not the external thing or like the different situations you're in that necessarily lead to like you having the desire. Like, the desire is there due to the wiring, which is due to you engaging in the compulsive behavior many times in the past. And there's nothing wrong with people having that desire. It's just the repetition of engaging in it. So the desire is not the problem. And really, it's our response to that desire that matters. It's that opportunity right there. We have the desire, we think it through rationally, and we just changed the neural pathways a little bit. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about is, in this bit here where he's saying, in my femdom porn addiction, especially feeling like a confident man who tries getting dates, it's exactly the opposite of listening to these doms constantly humiliate and degrading you, telling you you're a total loser who can never get a girlfriend and are only good to pay pretty girls. Well, what I want to talk about here is like, there's going to be these different parts. There's obviously the rational mind, the addicted part of the mind, these different parts. Now, this addicted part of the mind is going to kind of buy into the stuff about being a total loser. It wants you to feel humiliated. It wants you to be degraded. If you've got a femdom addiction, that's what the addicted part of the mind wants, because it wants you to just keep on engaging in addiction over and over and over and stay stuck in that cycle. So that's completely natural. But the rational part of the mind obviously wants to stop. And it's just realizing, like, this isn't who you are. Like, I don't see anyone with a femdom addiction as someone who like truly rationally wants to be called a loser or whatever. I just see that as the addicted part of the mind doing its job. And I don't really see that as like truly you. And most of the time I get to talk to people's rational minds who like, jumping on a call, they want to stop the behavior. So I'm talking to them from that lens. But it's the addicted part of the mind that would actually want, to have those sort of the DOMs like telling them these sort of things and reinforcing those like neural pathways of helplessness and worthlessness, and it kind of aligns well with the self-deprecation that we find very common in a porn addiction. So hopefully that makes sense as well. It's just to like kind of separate out the stuff that's involved inside of the actual, compulsive behavior from who you really are, because it's not actually that relevant, to be honest. And again, just want to reiterate this, that the reason you want to engage in a compulsive behavior is because your mind's involved in an emotional, psychological dependency with a mind's mood-altering experience. So you want to see it more as like a problem with addiction, like it could be with heroin or weed or alcohol or anything really, as opposed to like, the problem is the femdom. It's definitely more that you've just got this mind's mood-altering experience. And this can play out in all kinds of different ways. I was addicted to the femdom temporarily in the past as well. And really all I wanted was that mind's mood-altering experience. Now, where the addicted part of the mind will go is like overanalyze that, bring in childhood trauma and do all this different kind of stuff. But all we need to solve is actually, how do you stop looking at it? And once you stop looking at it and you stop seeking it, etc., and you're in control of yourself, you no longer have all like these kind of questions and sort of starting to kind of convolute the choice and make it about like, do I date, do I not? These DOMs have said these things, blah, blah, blah. You kind of just zoom out and you're like, none of that's actually relevant. It's just simply, how do I stop engaging in that behavior and then get into like quite a steady, stable place. And then from there, you crack on and develop healthy, just natural sort of relationships with people. Just want to bring this bit up as well. This is where we're going to get into the sort of emotional trauma, childhood side of things a little bit more as well. And this stuff is, it sounds like this guy's gone through some really, really tough shit. And I do want to like validate that. And that can definitely play a part in people becoming addicted in the first place. So he said, would also note that I'm 42 years old and never even had a girlfriend or even done any dating to speak of, which I mostly attribute to this porn addiction, which escalated to Femdom porn in 2016. In total, I've been addicted to porn for over 20 years now. Of course, I believe emotional trauma and childhood abuse is of course largely responsible as well. However, this Femdom porn sucks the soul out of me, leaving me on the side of the road with no real life relationships. And it seems to constantly reinforce the trauma and make my PTSD symptoms much worse. So yeah, this guy's definitely been through some really horrible stuff, and I'm sorry to hear that. And I'm glad that he shared this with me just to provide a bit more context, because what I'm going to get into now is more the kind of child parts. So what we teach is we teach the rational part of the mind. We teach that there is like a rational part of the mind, an addictive part of the mind, and then also there's a child self. Now the child self could be from any age really. On the screen here we've got like age 12, but could be a lot younger. Let's say you start watching porn at a very young age, like 7 or something. If you repeatedly do that over time, you're going to wire your brain to get addicted to the content. And then if you've gone through some kind of childhood trauma, you may feel a lot of shame around it. You may feel confused, upset, rejected, hurt, scared. There can be that fear as well. And what can happen is the addictive part of the mind is going to try and team up with the child self. And so when you're feeling kind of maybe particularly vulnerable and the child self's kind of active and it's got this kind of emotional immaturity because it's not really known how to defend itself from a very, very young age, and it's like this child part that's maybe like 7 years old or 12 or whatever, the addictive part of the mind is going to try and take advantage of those moments and get you to relapse. And it's trying to do that by presenting the idea of going ahead and relapsing as a solution to that intense sort of pain. In IFS, this would be like the exiled part. So the addictive part of the mind is like kind of like the manager part in the IFS world, so internal family systems. But this is the beyond compulsion method we're talking about. So I don't know why I'm getting off on IFS, but I just know the guy who actually sent me this email said he's done a bit of IFS sort of stuff as well, which I have as well. So basically, the addictive part of the mind is here, and it's going to try and get you to relapse, and it's going to use the child self. Now, most people, what they'll do is they'll try to deal with the child self directly, and like maybe work on like the shame or the confusion or the hurt or like the horrible shit that the child's gone through, and like talk that side of things out. And that might seem very productive and the right path to go down, but we actually don't go down that route at all. Instead, what we would do is kind of see things as, okay, the addicted part of the mind is like using the child's self and that vulnerability and that emotional immaturity and some horrible trauma or whatever, is trying to use that actually against you to keep you stuck in the cycle and relapse. And what we need to do, instead of like letting the addicted part of the mind just do that, we put the rational part of the mind in control in those moments to look after the child self. So we get the rational part of the mind to deal with the child self, and the rational part of the mind to deal with the addicted part of the mind in a very sort of proactive, assertive way, correct the thinking in those moments, and therefore you get to develop a really healthy relationship between the rational part of the mind and the child self. So just to go back to this extra bit of context, what I would just say about this, this guy's been through some tough shit. It sounds horrible, and it really does. Like, there's not really much more I can say than that. What we would do is we'd get the rational part of the mind to deal with the addicted part of the mind, and then once you're kind of clear on the addiction and you've dealt with the addicted part of the mind, dealing with the PTSD symptoms or the trauma, that sort of work would be, really, really good to work on, maybe with like a therapist who isn't gonna necessarily know how to deal with the addicted part of the mind. I hope that makes some sense. It's just we see it as like we want to prioritize dealing with the addicted part of the mind first, and then from that good kind of solid place, one, we're going to develop a better relationship with the child self then, because the child self can trust us, but two, we can even do like further work with the child self from a really good position once the addicted part of the mind's actually been dealt with directly. Hopefully that makes some sense. It's a bit of a different way to like what's conventional right now in society. So overall, the question today was, hey, can I just also ask how you navigate sex or dating during recovery? My overall answer is learn to deal with the addictive part of the mind very directly, get assertive on dealing with compulsive desires. Once you've done that, once you feel in control of yourself, once you have like self-trust, crack on and, do whatever you want basically. and you will know whether the sex or dating is compulsive, whether it's kind of part of the whole addiction, or whether it is something that you just naturally want to do now and you don't kind of have this, compulsive thinking around it. You will know when you're in a good position with this stuff. And I don't have any like time frames on that at all. I just think, you will know when you're ready to do that. Hopefully that makes some sense, but the number one priority right now for anyone with a Femdom addiction really should be, how do you learn to deal with the compulsive desires directly? So you have that self-trust now and you don't have to like remove the triggers or do any of that stuff. And then from there, you're going to be quite good to get into a relationship. And for me as well, I actually got into a relationship probably like, I can't remember exactly, it was probably like maybe 6 or 7 months after learning this method. So what happened for me is I completely prioritized just going all in on this method, really sort of getting that training from Mary Paulus, understanding the Beyond Compulsion method, applying it over and over and over, using the script, building up that self-trust, going through a lot of desires. And then very, very naturally, I ended up actually in a relationship. I wasn't seeking one. I wasn't on any dating apps at all. I've never been on a dating app since learning this method, and I never would be. But I ended up like meeting a girl from my running club and from my book club, the same person, and we got on really well. We became quite good friends. And then one thing led to the next, and we ended up in a relationship, and we're still together now, and we've just moved in together last week. So it's definitely possible as well, because I used to struggle with the Femdom stuff. So yeah, it's definitely possible to overcome this stuff, but don't convolute the choice. Don't make it too much about like the Femdom stuff. It's just addiction, like heroin or any other addiction. And once you're clear on dealing with the addiction, you're going to be very good to healthily get into a relationship and enjoy that. And then that just becomes another benefit of actually overcoming the addiction. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this can help. And as I say, if you'd like to learn more about the Beyond Compulsion method and maybe have a chat with me, do the compulsion test, leave your number there. I'll give you a call. Cheers, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.